myself have as our primary task examining Matthew's work to see if it merits the master's degree at Oregon State University. The process that will follow is first about a 25-minute presentation that Matthew will make summarizing summarizing the thesis, focusing especially on the analysis chapters and the conclusion chapters. After that, there will be a period for open questions where anyone in the audience can ask any questions that they'd like of Matthew. And at that point, we'll dismiss everyone but the committee and Matthew, and then the committee will examine Matthew separately. And then we'll dismiss Matthew and then deliberate. So, with no other delays, Matthew, you ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ilpis. I'd like to welcome you all here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm humbled to be able to represent such a sensitive topic. And bear in mind and have no doubt that 6 million souls stand behind us today as we try to honor their lives. To introduce my thesis committee, that Dr. Iltis has already done that, but thank you for coming and thank you for being a part of this process with me. As Dr. Iltis said, I'll have my thesis followed by questions, and then the committee and I will deliberate. Nazi Germany, 1938. The Der Stürmer publishing house, under the control of Julius Streicher, published Der Giftpilz, or The Poisonous Mushroom, an anti-Semitic children's book. Disseminated in the thousands, Der Giftpilz became infamously known as a children's book so grotesque that it could be, and in fact was, admitted as evidence in the Nuremberg trials of 1946. Streicher was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. Der Stürmer published 2 children's books, Der Giftpilz and Trust No Fox on His Green Heath and No Jew on His Oath. Der Giftpilz was an astonishingly clear representation of the Nazi agenda. Streicher, his publishing house Der Stürmer, and Phipps, an infamous Nazi cartoonist, marched on the unsuspecting minds of the German youth through these books by providing a symbolic world that interpreted the proper life Nazism had created for Germany. By 1938, the Nazis had effectively quarantined undesirables in Germany. By the time Der Giftpilz was published, Jews remaining in Germany were outcasts, an impoverished group. Thus, when German children happened upon the Jew, the concepts and illustrations within Der Giftpilz emphasizing the Jews as outliers were validated by the virtue of the Nuremberg laws that were instituted in 1935. There is an intimate relationship between reality and the description of it. This study seeks to explore the totalizing nature of the Jewish question and its usage as an explanatory backdrop towards the manipulation of children. Congruently, this study seeks to expose Der Giftpilz's rhetorical function through the use of Ernest Bormann's fantasy theme analysis. Particularly, this study illuminates a child version of Nazi ideology that is utterly delusory, yet instructive and corrective in a Nazi sense. There is an intimate relationship between reality and description of it. Ernest Bormann's fantasy theme analysis, created in the 1970s, assumes that reality is largely based on how it is described. Reality's description is often created by reality's description is often dramatized to create a fantasy world. Now, Bormann asks a question based on rhetorical insight. Could skillful communicators design messages with an eye on a specific target audience and deliver those messages in such a way that others were brought into participation in the fantasy? Essentially, for our questions here, could Der Giftpilz create a compelling fantasy world that gestures people to come and participate within those ideas? To answer this question, I turn to fantasy theme analysis's components. First, themes. provide artistic and comprehensive forms for thinking about and experiencing the future. Themes are archived in a memory bank. The individual or the group, if they don't know what to do, they can revert back to these themes that can thus justify action or inform action and belief. The way that the themes are constructed is through types. These fantasy types are the narrative elements, characters, scenes, and actions that are played over and over again. Now these form patterns throughout the narratives or throughout discourse and throughout and create thus a fantasy world. The fanciful elements of the group's fantasy or an individual's fantasy become reality to the extent that the messages are persuasive, that are caught up and interacted with people, and then elaborated upon. Thus, a vision of the fantasy world emerges as these types, themes, and participants interact with each other. This interaction causes a rhetorical vision of how the world should be and how one should behave in it. Rhetorical visions make sense out of and account for reality. The rhetorical vision accounts plausibly for evidence of the senses, so that people who pick up the dramatic action and find it personally satisfying will not be bothered by contradictory evidence. Essentially, does Der Giftpilz possess such a fantasy where people will be not troubled by contradictory evidence? These claims will be so clear. These claims will be so clear that contradictory evidence doesn't even enter their mind? We think yes. In addition to fantasy theme analysis, I call on intercultural communication. And it seemed like the best fit because you have Jews and Germans, two cultures, interculturally interacting. And now I wanted to see through intercultural communication how these intercultural beings manage and negotiate their identities. How does Der Giftpilz present the Jew and present the German? His identity. I want to briefly explain what the book looks like, just so you get an outline, so you can understand how a reader would read from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 17. So first you'd see pictures at the beginning, you'd have a narrative, and then at the end you'd have a poem. And I'll talk about each of these issues in my discussion. But there are 17 mini-narratives that don't have a consistent theme. Or they have a consistent theme, meaning Jew hatred, but they don't have main characters. They don't have one character that's followed or one scene that this fantasy develops. Rather, they are separate individual narratives that are collected in this book. There are 40 German characters, 9 Jewish characters, 25 plus ways to describe the Jew. The settings range all normal aspects of German life: the school, streets, the doctor's office, even the bank, which it looks like the Jew is controlling. This one over here. All these are normal aspects except for two: the synagogue and the Jewish slaughterhouse, but I'll get to those. The last elements of form are narratives, the pictures, and the poems. And because we look at fantasy theme analysis looks for patterns and commonalities, I separated my questions into two different aspects to describe the German and then the Jew, or the Jew and then the German. So for the Jew, I asked, how's the Jew's appearance described? What physical attributes are highlighted? And what behaviors are the Jews involved in? I wanted to understand these characters and how they interact between the German and the Jew. So Der Giftpilz will describe. The German is what scenes is the German in, what relationships are fostered, what is German appearance, what is German behavior, and lastly, what does the narrative voice emphasize, what do the poems do, and how is doubt assuaged? For those who don't believe or have maybe problem with the Jewish question, we have to deal with that. And how will somebody who doesn't believe in this question and this necessity, how will they come to realize that in fact Nazism has the answer, Der Giftpilz has the answers? The patterns uncovered through Der Giftpilz helped me realize its overall continuity, narrative continuity. It seems like there are four conceptual ideas that the reader is drawn through, and these ideas provide a basis for the types and rhetorical visions and themes to play themselves out. And these structures are as follows. Combined, the reader is guided through the thoughts and behavior of the Jews, while also providing the fantasy a place to play out. So first structure. A progressive organizational structure draws the reader into three main ideas. This begins in chapters 1 through 6, goes through chapters 7 through 14, and then 15 through 17 are the final chapters. And each one has its own sort of gestalt, its own theme that is associated with it. The first is appearance and ideology. The appearance is described heavily in chapters 1 through 6. If you were going to graph it, it would be peak, and then all of a sudden a drop in appearance. However, the opposite would happen, where they would start to describe behavior. No real behaviors are described, and then it's described in chapter 7 and on. This juxtaposition between appearance and ideology, see, the German learns how to think as well. I'll read you a quote from chapter 1, where the mother is teaching Hans about poison. There are good mushrooms and there are good people. There are poisonous, hence bad mushrooms, and there are bad people. And one must watch out for these bad peoples, just like one must watch out for the poisonous mushrooms. Do you understand that, she asks. A syllogism, which is a conclusion drawn from two premises, forms. And that's where we have another example, is a big forehead is a sign of a criminal. Also, Jews have big foreheads. Two premises, and the conclusion is thus, Jews are criminals. This teaches a German reader how to think based on appearance and behavior. The German is able to identify the Jew, but able to think like a German. The second, an experiential set, is where the Germans experience the behavior. So the behavior is now described, and the Germans are going to experience that behavioral part of the syllogism. And interestingly, they call on an enthematic reasoning, which I said a syllogism is a conclusion based off the two premises. This is entheme is a premise or a conclusion left out. And so Hans accompanies his sister to meet the strange Jewish man. And he doesn't say he's a criminal. He doesn't even know that he's a Jew. But upon seeing him, he sees that he has a Jewish nose, weird lips, big ears, funky hair, he smells, he has a weird accent. And he enthematically, he leaves out the conclusion and runs to the police. He sees the appearance, equates that with the Jew, and then runs to the police as if he is a criminal, but he didn't state that he was a criminal. This shows the German reader how easy it is to go from one to the other. It fictitiously answers the Jewish question, which leads us to the last and uniformed vision of the chapters. Again, this is just the structure, the organization of how the book goes. These are the culmination of the narratives and the most logical outcome exposed. The uniformed version of reality. All the visions show a progression from how the German mind should think, where their legs should march, and to whom their spirit should yearn. All activities become imbued with the Jewish question. One thing to highlight is in this scenario, we have the uniform. And in these, it's just normal. It's a progression from ignorance to reform to the uber narrative, the rhetorical vision, to Nazism. There are four characters that create somewhat of a similar structure, like the organization of the book. And these characters are the German characters and the Jewish character. Now the Jewish character, as you can see, I have some very fine descriptors of the Jew. And the Jewish character is the basis for all interaction between the other German characters. So first the Jew.